Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Alec Wenzel and I'm a professional guitar player living here in Denver, Colorado. And today we're talking about the Chase Bliss Mood. Now, I have the title of this video sort of listed as like a how to use the Chase Bliss Mood, but we're not going to do a review where we exhaust every feature set that the Mood has. What we're going to talk about is how you as a guitar player can use the Mood effectively in your live set in a band setting, right? I feel like so much of what we see of Chase Bliss pedals on social media is like it's the pedal sitting on a desk and there's a synth or like tape sample running into it and someone's controlling the parameters in real time, and that's really cool. I love to see that stuff, but it's just not representative of what we can do when it's kind of sitting on your pedal board, right? So today we're going to talk about how I use the Mood in live sets to create ambience and create transitions and go over, it's sort of more like practical feature set, how you can jump into using the Mood right away on your pedal board for some fun effects. All right, let's get into it. So what am I using the Chase Bliss Mood for in my live sets? Well, the Mood is a particularly useful pedal because it's essentially two pedals in one, right? On one side, over here, you've got your ambient wet effects, and these are really big effects, right? It's not a subtle reverb or a subtle delay. These are going to take up a lot of space, which is nice when you need to create a sort of atmosphere in a song. And then this side over here is a micro looper, which will allow you to put in a small like line or texture that may be missing from the record because you don't have a second guitar player. But with this, you can create that little texture, that feel, and then still have space to play over it. And then, of course, you can combine both of these effects together by turning both sides on, and then you can create some sort of big transitional space or some sort of large ambient texture, right? So a lot of uses for the Mood, and I like it because it's shrunk down into this really small format. It lets me put it on my small board, which I've been trying to take to gigs more because I don't necessarily have space on stage for my like giant pedal board, my spaceship, my Millennium Falcon, my ramen bowl full of noodles because its wires are run really poorly. But that's why we're talking about it today. And we're going to talk about this left side first, and we're going to jump into some sounds and see what I'm sort of using those for. All right, so wet effects. The Mood's on the floor. We're about to hear some different samples. But before we get into that, I've got to just tell you about two knobs really quickly, right? And I'm going to put an image up on screen so you can see what I'm talking about. But the Chase Bliss Mood has 6 knobs, right? And the two that we need to talk about are the two in the middle because they, I think, freak people out, right? Now, there's 6 knobs on the Chase Bliss Mood. 2 affect the wet channel, 2 affect the dry channel, right? The middle 2 work for both, and they're mix and sample rate, right? Now, mix, we all know what mix does. If you want to hear more of the effect, you turn the mix knob up. I typically have my mix set pretty high because this is an ambient effect that I want to hear a lot of, right? I want to create a lot of that sound. So my mix is typically at 50% or above. The sample rate is much more complicated because it affects the quality of the signal that you're passing through the Mood. So you can create some fun, dark sample sound effects that way. But I typically leave that right at noon so we get a clear signal because I want my ambience to be predictable. I use it a little bit to make my loops chaotic, so I'll show you that at the end. But for all of our purposes, just assume that the sample rate knob is set at noon for a perfectly clear signal. All right, let's jump into the first wet effect I'm going to show you, which is reverb. This is the one that I use the most because it's like a big ambient reverb, and it's basically replacing what I'm doing on my big board with the Strymon Big Sky, right? So I'm using it to get this giant ambient sound, and we're going to hear a little bit of that right now. Okay, right, so just a short sample of what that reverb sounds like, and those two knobs on the left that are affecting that sound are the time and modify knobs, right? So in the reverb setting, time is setting the size of the cave, room, whatever they're using to emulate that reverb, right? If you shout in a big empty chamber, it sounds reverberant, right? So that's that. And then the modify is the space between the echoes, right? I typically have this modify knob set pretty high so I get a nice smooth giant sounding reverb, right? But you can set it all the way down and get this sort of almost pulsed delay reverb, which is also cool, also a great effect, but just not what I'm typically using it for, right? I want a big ambient sound to fill a lot of space and sound ethereal, right? But here's what it sounds like with the modify knob turned all the way down. All right, and now that we've heard that sort of pulsing delayed reverb thing, let's talk about the actual delay. So it's great. It sounds like a delay. I'm going to be honest, I don't typically use the mood for this, right? It's just a normal clean delay. The time knob sets the time between repeats, and the modify knob is the feedback knob, how many repeats that you're hearing, right? That's what feedback is on a delay. Now, if you're looking at the mood and you're going, great, I can buy it and use it as a delay, don't do that, right? You can get another delay that's cheaper, that does more, that's easier to control, and it will be like having this, right? And in fact, I recommend that, right? I use delay with the mood a lot, but not necessarily on the pedal. I occasionally use it to make the loops sound different, but I normally would not go with this setting. But let's hear what it sounds like. It's a good delay. All right, so it's a delay, right? It sounds like a delay. My recommendation is that you go get another delay to use in conjunction with the mood. You're going to be able to maximize the mood's weird effects that way, and I think you'll just get a lot more out of the pedal with your own standalone delay kind of after it or before it, right? So now finally, let's talk about this third option for the wet effects, and it's slip mode. I use it kind of like a reverse tape sampler. What it is it's a like looped sampler that's spitting back out whatever you play into it kind of continuously. And you can sort of affect the speed and immediacy of that with the time knob, and then what direction that sort of loop replay is coming in with the modify knob, right? So it's kind of like a Red Panda tensor, right? You can affect which direction you're hearing your sample and then how quickly and aggressively you're hearing it. I like this to create like little glitchy textures. I think it sounds best that way. I typically use it with the reverse mode, right? So that's the modify knob all the way down, so the speed is really fast. When the speed's really slow, it can sound really chunky, and you don't get that sort of cool glitchy texture out of it. So here's what that sounds like. All right, so now that we've talked about the left side of the mood, which is our ambient and wet effects, we're now going to talk about the right side of the mood, which is our micro looping side. Now, this is great for creating all sorts of little glitchy loops, but you might be saying to yourself, like, how do I use that live? And for me, there are two main uses. The first is to create an ambient pad that can create this second part that you may not have access to without a second guitar player, like I mentioned earlier. And then the other use is to introduce chaos kind of at the end of a lead section to add some tension as you transition out of a big moment, right? So I'm going to give playing examples for both of those, but I'm not going to go through and give playing examples of all of the settings on this side of the mood. There's three, and I think the tape looping is the setting that is easiest to create something predictable that's still glitchy. The other two settings are envelope, which interrupt your loop with other things that you're playing and is really fun, but you're not really able to capture that moment live as easily. And then the other one is stretch, which can also give you a very predictable loop like the tape looper, but I find that the changes that you make to it become more and more dramatic than what you're getting on the tape loop side, so you're not able to create an ambient pad as easily. So with all of that being said, we're going to create these two different sounds, and I'm going to show you this ambient pad first. This is going to be how I create an ambient pad for one of the songs in a set that I'm playing with my band, which has a bass solo in it, and we sort of get that ambient pad started and then are able to play some chords on top of it to make it sound a little bit fuller as the bass player picks up speed with their solo. Okay, so what you saw me do there was play a line repeatedly and then engage the right side of the mood. This is because the mood is always listening, right? So you can set the length of that micro loop using the clock knob, which is our sample rate knob, as I said earlier. But I tend to leave it right at noon, and you just watch the blinking red dot. You play your line, and once you've seen that red dot happen twice, you then can click to engage it, and you will get your loop started. From there, I was able to add the ambient side on top of that to create that sort of lush sound. And then the other cool part about the mood is that you can have your input signal either affected by the wet effects or not after the loop has started by using that dip switch in the middle there. And if you want to play something more defined, you can just turn it off so it's affecting only the loop with the ambient effects, or if you want both going, so it's an ambient line plus your ambient chords, then that's great too. But that's how you can use the mood to make a small padded micro loop for a building moment on stage, or to give it some sort of, extra atmosphere for when you have a dynamically low or quieter section. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to listen to how to use the mood to create chaos at the end of a guitar solo. And I know that Joey Landreth has been doing this. He put the mood on one of his most recent board builds that he was kind of showing off on the Golden Age of Gear, which is a show that Rev Amps does with him. And it's a cool idea. It's a great way to create a sort of, Jimi Hendrix-esque texture after you've played some big lead line and you're coming down into, again, maybe quieter section, or you're transitioning out of a big moment. So the way I was able to make that chaos happen at the end of the solo was by just stepping on both the ambient effect and the loop at the same time. Now you can do this on the Mood because the small form factor puts both of those switches right next to each other. And again, as I mentioned earlier, because the micro looper is always listening, you just sort of hit it whenever you're finishing out and it will capture whatever you had just played and then spit it back out with the ambient effect going, because again, you stepped on them both at the same time, right? You don't have to do one then the other. Engage both at once and you get that sort of very chaotic burst. Then you can fade it out with like a volume pedal after the Mood, which is what I typically do on stage, but you just watched me sort of bend down and twist that mix knob all the way down to sort of give it that live studio fade effect. All right, and so finally with that, those are some awesome starting places for you to begin using the Mood as a guitar player in your live sets. Now, I feel like I covered a lot today, but I also want to point out that I kind of barely scratched the surface. This pedal is such a deep effect. You can run it with expression pedals, you can program it with MIDI. We didn't get into any of the dip switches on the back, we didn't get into any of the ramping functions, right? So you could do just about anything that you wanted with this pedal that is an ambient or wet effect. But what I wanted to showcase with this was that you can pull it right out of the box and it can have immediate practical applications as an ambient pad, as a delay, as a textural device. It's awesome for creating loops on stage to add extra parts as we showed, and it also sort of gives you these studio-esque effects with those sort of chaos reverse outro solo things, and you don't have to get into all of that programming, right? And you certainly don't have to operate the Mood exclusively on your Instagram page with a synthesizer and an above camera and having your hands on all the controls. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please give me a like and a subscription. It's free to you, but it really helps me out. Again, my name was Alec Wenzel, and I hope you come back more to listen to more music and talk about more gear.